The nicest person in the room is usually the one who feels the least free to leave it. He says yes before he even finishes hearing the question. He apologizes for things that were never his fault. He laughs at jokes that weren't funny. He agrees with opinions he doesn't hold, and somehow ends up carrying plans he never wanted to make. Everyone calls him easygoing. Everyone says how lucky they are to have someone so accommodating around. And yet, late at night, something in him feels tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. Why does being kind feel, sometimes, like slowly disappearing? I used to think niceness was simple. A person is either warm or they aren't, generous or they aren't, easy to get along with or they aren't. But the more I watched people like him, the more that explanation stopped making sense. Because this wasn't warmth exactly. It was something closer to vigilance, wearing a friendly face. A constant, quiet scanning of the room to make sure no one was upset, no one was inconvenienced, no one had a single reason to be disappointed in him. He'll tell you he just doesn't like conflict. He'll say he's a peaceful person, that he'd rather keep things smooth than make a scene. And that's true as far as it goes. But watch him a little longer and you start to notice something odd. He isn't just avoiding conflict with other people, he's avoiding conflict with a version of himself he's terrified of becoming, the version who says no and watches someone's face fall. So he doesn't get there. He agrees first and figures out how he feels about it later, usually somewhere around midnight, staring at the ceiling, replaying the conversation, wondering why he keeps doing this to himself. It keeps happening because saying yes feels safe, and safety, once you've needed it badly enough, starts to feel more important than freedom. Here's the part that's hard to sit with. The same quality that makes him so easy to love is the same quality that's slowly wearing him down. His attentiveness, the way he notices what other people need before they even ask, that's not a flaw. It's a real gift, and people feel it. They feel cared for around him in a way they can't always explain. But that same radar, tuned so finely to everyone else's comfort, has almost nothing left over to check on his own. He can tell you exactly what his friend is feeling from the tone of one text message. Ask him what he's feeling, and there's a pause, a kind of static, like the question was asked in a language he used to speak fluently and slowly forgot. The strength and the wound live in the exact same place. That's what makes this so hard to untangle. If the gift were separate from the cost, he could just trim away the bad part and keep the good. But it isn't separate. The sensitivity that makes him a safe person to be around is the same sensitivity that makes him unable to protect himself from the people who take advantage of it.
There's something almost cruel about the shape of this, if you look at it closely enough. The way the exact trait people praise him for is the trait quietly draining him, so that every compliment about how kind he is lands with a strange, hollow echo underneath it, a small voice asking what would happen if he stopped. Maybe the problem was never that he cares too much. Maybe the problem is what caring has had to protect him from. Because somewhere, at some point, being agreeable stopped being a preference and became a strategy. And strategies aren't chosen at random. They're built, usually early, usually quietly, in response to something that made a different approach feel too risky. So when did this start? Picture a house where the temperature could shift in a second. Not a house with obvious danger, nothing anyone outside would call abuse. Just a home where a parent's mood set the weather for everyone else, where you learned to read a slammed cupboard door or a certain silence the way sailors read clouds before a storm. In a house like that, a kid doesn't sit down and decide to become agreeable. His nervous system does the deciding for him, faster than thought, faster than words. He notices, very young, that when he's easy, things stay calm. When he pushes back, even a little, something shifts in the air that he doesn't have the tools to handle. So a pattern forms, not out of weakness, but out of intelligence, A young brain doing exactly what young brains are built to do, adapting to the environment it's actually in, not the one it wishes it had. This isn't only built in homes like that either. Sometimes it's temperament from the start, a nervous system simply born more attuned to other people's emotional signals, more porous, more reactive to tension in a room. Combine that wiring with an environment that rewards compliance and punishes friction, even subtly, even unintentionally, and you get someone who learns cell by cell that his own needs are the least urgent thing in any given moment. It isn't about blame. His parents may have loved him fiercely and still taught him this, simply by being human, by having their own bad days, by not realizing what their tone was training him to become. This is not a story about villains. It's a story about a brain doing its best to keep a child safe inside conditions it didn't choose. Sometimes it wasn't even a loud house at all, but a quiet one, where love felt conditional on being useful, where being agreeable was the thing that earned attention in a family too busy or too distracted to give it freely. So a child learns, without anyone ever saying it out loud, that being easy is the price of being wanted. Whatever the exact shape of it, the underlying lesson tends to be the same, that closeness has to be earned through accommodation, that love is safer when it isn't tested, and a nervous system that learns this early doesn't just forget it once the danger has passed. It keeps applying the old rule to new rooms, long after those rooms have stopped being dangerous at all. And once that pattern gets laid down, it doesn't stay in childhood. It comes with him. It shows up everywhere. He noticed it first at work, years later, in a meeting where his manager asked if anyone could take on one more project. His hand went up before his brain finished processing what he just agreed to. He already had too much. He knew it in the moment. And still, some faster, older part of him answered a question that wasn't really about the project at all. It was about staying likable, staying safe. I've watched this happen with friends of mine too, the ones who text back, "No worries at all," through gritted teeth, who say, "I'm so easy, whatever works for you," so often that their own preferences have quietly gone extinct. You might recognize this in yourself, in the way you order whatever's easiest at a restaurant instead of what you actually want, just so nobody has to wait on your decision.
It shows up in relationships most of all. He'll stay in a conversation long after he's ready to leave it, nodding along, because ending it first might look like he doesn't care. He'll say, "It's fine," about things that are very much not fine, and mean it a little more each time he says it, until the feeling underneath just stops sending signals at all. Even rest becomes complicated. He can't fully relax around people until he's sure, somehow, that everyone else in the room is comfortable first. His own ease is always the last thing on the list, if it makes the list at all. It shows up in smaller places too, places that never announce themselves as important. A group of friends deciding where to eat, and he's the one who says, "Anywhere is fine," even when there's a place he's been wanting to try for weeks. Nobody asks him twice because he's trained them, without meaning to, that his preferences are never really on the table. It shows up when someone cuts in front of him in line, and his mouth opens to say something and closes again, and he spends the next 10 minutes composing the sentence he should have said, a sentence that will never actually get spoken to that particular stranger. I've noticed the same thing in myself, honestly. Replaying an entire argument I never had, winning it flawlessly, in the shower 3 days later. It shows up in the way he reads a single flat text message 5 times, searching for anger that probably isn't there, because somewhere along the way he learned that missing a warning sign cost more than seeing one that wasn't real. Better to overread the room than to be caught off guard by it. Each of these moments looks small on its own. A yes here, a swallowed opinion there, a birthday plan he didn't want but organized anyway. But something starts to happen when you look at all of them together, something that isn't visible in any single moment. They start to connect. because every time he says yes to avoid a bad feeling, the bad feeling doesn't just disappear, it gets rescheduled. It moves into his body, into the tightness in his shoulders, into that low hum of resentment he can't quite name, because naming it would mean admitting he's angry. And admitting he's angry feels dangerous in a way that never fully goes away. And here's the part that makes it a loop instead of just a habit. The relief he feels every time he keeps the peace, that brief exhale when no one is upset with him, is real relief. His nervous system reads it as proof the strategy worked, which makes it more likely he'll use the exact same strategy next time and the time after that, tightening the same groove a little deeper with each pass. Slowly, without ever making a dramatic decision to change, his life gets smaller around the edges. He stops mentioning restaurants he'd actually like to try. He stops bringing up disagreements, even small ones, because bringing them up has never once felt worth the discomfort. Somewhere in there, he stops being fully sure what he even wants anymore, because he spent so many years optimizing for what other people want instead. This is what a self-reinforcing loop looks like from the inside. Not a single bad decision, but 1,000 small, reasonable-seeming ones, each one making the next one a little more automatic. There's a strange cost to this that doesn't show up right away. The people closest to him start to know less and less of who he actually is, not because he's hiding on purpose, but because the smoothed-over version of him is the only one that ever gets any airtime. Even the people who love him end up loving a slightly edited draft. And underneath that, a quieter kind of loneliness starts to grow, the specific loneliness of being surrounded by people and still feeling unknown. Because being liked and being known aren't the same thing, and somewhere along the way he traded one for the other without ever choosing to. And maybe the hardest part is that this loop still has a job to do. It's not malfunctioning, it's still doing exactly what it was built for, all those years ago, protecting him from a version of conflict he no longer actually lives inside. Maybe what needs to change isn't him. Maybe it's just time to tell that old strategy that the storm it's been preparing for already passed. Because here's something that doesn't get said enough. He doesn't need a personality transplant. He doesn't need to become the person who cuts people off, who stops caring what anyone thinks, who turns cold to protect himself. That would just trade one kind of exhaustion for another, and it would cost him the very thing that makes people trust him in the first place. What actually shifts things is much smaller than that, and much stranger. It starts with a pause. Not a dramatic one, just a single beat between the question and the automatic yes, long enough for a different part of him to catch up and actually be asked. That pause alone starts to change everything, because for the first time, the answer isn't already decided before he's even heard the request. From that pause, something else becomes possible. He can say, "Let me think about it," instead of yes, and notice that the world doesn't end. He can watch someone's face flicker with mild disappointment and discover, almost to his own surprise, that he survives it. Nobody leaves.
Nobody explodes. The sky, somehow, stays exactly where it was. Each time that happens, the old belief gets a tiny bit weaker. Not gone, not fixed in a single afternoon, but weaker, the way a muscle that's been clenched for years slowly remembers what it feels like to release, one small stretch at a time. A new boundary doesn't have to sound harsh to be real. It can sound like, "I actually can't take that on right now," instead of a paragraph of apology. It can sound like naming a preference out loud, just once, in a low-stakes moment, and noticing that being specific about what he wants didn't make anyone love him less. Somewhere in that process, a new belief starts to take root, quietly, underneath all the old wiring. The belief that he can be cared for and cared about even when he isn't managing everyone else's comfort every second. That people who matter don't actually need him to be endlessly convenient. They just need him to be there, honestly, as himself. there's a difference between the version of him that keeps the peace out of fear and the version of him that chooses kindness because it's genuinely who he is. From the outside, those two versions might look almost identical. From the inside, they feel like entirely different lives. One is exhausting because it's compulsory, the other is sustainable because it's chosen. The people who are only ever drawn to his compliance might drift a little, and that's allowed to hurt without meaning something went wrong. But the people who are actually drawn to him, underneath all that managing, tend to lean in closer once he stops performing ease and starts just being present. He doesn't have to become someone else to have this. He just has to let the person who was always in there, underneath all that vigilance, finally take a turn speaking. So picture him again in that same kind of room where we started. Someone asking for one more favor, one more yes. This time, something's different. Not because the request changed, because he did. He still feels that old pull, the automatic urge to agree before he's even finished hearing the ask. But now, there's a pause where there used to be nothing. And in that pause, he actually gets to check in with himself, actually gets to ask what he wants, not just what will keep the room calm. Maybe he says yes anyway, but now it's a real yes, chosen instead of triggered. Or maybe, for the first time in a long while, he says something else, and the room doesn't fall apart around him. It never does. What he's carrying now isn't a fear disguised as kindness anymore. It's just kindness on its own, no longer working overtime to keep him safe from something that isn't actually in the room. And that's the quiet, almost invisible moment where everything shifts, not with a dramatic breakthrough, but with one honest sentence finally spoken out loud, in a voice that sounds a little more like his own. Nobody in that room would be able to point to the exact second it happened, because it wasn't loud enough to notice from the outside. But he'll know. He'll carry that pause with him into the next room, and the one after that. A small, steady proof that he doesn't have to disappear in order to be loved. If any part of this felt familiar, I'm curious where you first noticed it in yourself. Maybe it's a conversation you keep replaying, or a yes you wish you could take back. You don't have to have it all figured out to say so, out loud, in the comments to people who might be reading this and quietly nodding along. Because chances are, someone else watching this right now has never once said any of this to anybody, and maybe today's the day that changes, even just a little, even just here. If this is the part of you that's always taking care of everyone else, there's another video I made about what happens when that instinct turns inward, when the person you're hardest on ends up being yourself. It might be the next piece of this same puzzle.